The story begins with a notorious criminal named Frank Morris, who was being sent to a high-security prison called Alcatraz. This prison was located on an island in the middle of the sea, and no prisoner had ever escaped from there. But Frank was famous for escaping from prisons, and he had already broken out of several prisons before. However, no one had even thought about escaping from Alcatraz, let alone actually doing it. As soon as Frank arrived at the prison, he was thoroughly searched and then sent to his cell, where he was supposed to spend the rest of his life. The next day during breakfast, Frank met an elderly inmate named Litmus, who had a pet rat. During their conversation, Frank noticed another prisoner named Wolf, who was openly harassing him, but Frank ignored him and continued talking to Litmus. After a while, Frank was called to the warden's office for a briefing, where the warden warned him not to try to escape, stating that many had come before him and failed. However, during the warden's speech, Frank quietly stole a nail cutter from the room. It was a small item, but Frank knew that in a place like Alcatraz, even a small tool could be useful. He immediately hid the nail cutter inside a Bible once he returned to his cell. Later, during a group shower, Wolf came up to Frank again and began harassing him. But this time, Frank wasn't in the mood to ignore him. He grabbed Wolf and started beating him up. This act earned Frank a reputation inside the prison, and soon no one dared to mess with him. Gradually, the prison library became Frank's second home, where he met the prison librarian, English. English, like Frank, had been sentenced to life imprisonment and had given up on any desire to get out. Instead, he lost himself in books, especially history books, which both he and Frank enjoyed. They became good friends due to their shared interest. During this time, Frank also met a prisoner named Doc, who was a talented artist. Doc spent most of his time painting and believed that anyone could go mad in a dangerous prison like Alcatraz. However, painting had kept his mind sane so far. That evening, a guard informed Frank about a carpenter job opening, which paid 15 cents an hour, but soon Frank's troubles would multiply. One day, while all the prisoners were out of their cells, Wolf returned. This time he had a weapon and tried to attack Frank, but at the right moment, Doc warned Frank, and he used his jacket to block the attack. A fight broke out between Frank and Wolf, and when the guards tried to intervene, Wolf attacked one of them as well. Both Frank and Wolf were sent to solitary confinement in D Block, a cage where no prisoner ever wanted to be. In solitary confinement, prisoners were kept alone, and it was a place that no one wanted to end up in. Frank was furious that he was now in that cage just for defending himself. After 2 weeks, when Frank was released, Litmus sent him a welcome note through his rat to cheer him up. Once Frank was back, he also became friends with his neighbor, Charlie. He was serving a sentence for a major theft and told Frank that he regretted crossing the border to escape, as it made his crime even worse. The next day, the warden decided to make an unscheduled visit to the prison. During this visit, he came across a photo of a prisoner in his cell, which he initially liked. However, the very next second, he ordered all of Doc's paintings to be removed from the prison. This decision broke Doc completely, as his paintings were his only source of solace. Frank tried to console him repeatedly, telling him that they were just paintings and that life had to go on. But Doc couldn't recover from the shock. One day during a shift, Doc lost 3 of his fingers in what seemed like a form of rebellion against the warden. As soon as this happened, the guards immediately sent for the doctors. Meanwhile, Frank stood quietly, watching Doc in silence. That night, while Frank was sitting in his cell, he noticed cockroaches coming out from a vent. This gave him an idea that the vent might be an exit route. At that moment, English told him that the warden had removed all of Doc's paintings because he didn't like his own photo. The next time they were having their meal, Frank met 2 brothers, John and Clarence, who recognized him from a previous prison. They talked about how it was impossible to escape from Alcatraz as it was surrounded by water on all sides, and they would have to spend their whole lives there. However, their conversation sparked a new idea in Frank's mind, and he now wanted to make history. He wanted to be the first person to escape from this prison. That night, Frank started scraping the cement around the bars of his cell, using the nail cutter he had stolen from the warden's office. Every time he heard the guard's footsteps, he would hide the nail cutter in the Bible and pretend to read it, so no one would suspect him. Over time, his efforts started to pay off, and the cement around the bars became weaker. Meanwhile, during a visit, English and Charlie went to meet their families. English hesitated while talking to his daughter, who had grown up a lot during his absence. He deeply regretted not being able to see her childhood. On the other hand, during his visit to his wife, Charlie learned that his elderly mother's health was deteriorating rapidly. According to the doctors, she only had a few months left to live, which made Charlie want to escape from Alcatraz even more. The next morning during breakfast, Frank laid out his escape plan in front of John and Charlie. According to Frank, the salty water in the air had weakened the prison's building, allowing them to scrape the cement and remove the ventilation grills. Once they got through the grills, they could follow the pipes and escape. But there was still the issue of how they would cross the sea once they escaped. Frank then explained that Clarence worked in the prison's clothing department, and he could help them with that. One by one, Frank could steal small pieces of raincoats and some rubber cement. With all this, I know how to make a lifeboat and life jackets. Trust me, I can do it. Frank's plan was very well received by everyone, and they all decided to work together on it. So every day, just like usual, Frank was busy scraping cement out of his cell. This time, Charlie was with him, keeping watch outside his cell to make sure none of the guards caught onto their plan. While Frank was working, though, the nail cutter was small, which made the task take a lot of time and effort. The nail cutter wasn't very sharp, so Frank had to put a lot of pressure on it, which caused his hands to get injured, and the wounds were starting to bother him. The next morning, he shared this problem with everyone, and they realized they needed a bigger, stronger tool. Just then, Frank noticed his spoon. He quickly rubbed it on his shoe to dirty it, and then complained to a guard about the spoon being dirty. The others backed him up, asking the guard to replace the spoon. The guard saw no issue with it and readily agreed to swap it out. As soon as they went to the front desk to exchange the spoons, John distracted the guard, giving Frank the opportunity to sneak an extra spoon into his pocket. But that wasn't enough. Frank then traded some of his share of food for the next 20 days with litmus in exchange for other materials. He melted the spoon and combined it with a nail cutter and a coin to create a new, more effective tool. That same night, as Frank was quickly scraping the cement, a guard appeared. Charlie didn't notice him, but luckily English stepped in just in time, distracting the guard and giving Charlie the chance to punch the jail bars to signal Frank. When Frank got the signal, he immediately hid the tools. They managed to escape notice this time, but Frank realized he couldn't trust Charlie fully anymore. In the following days, Frank realized that the grills had screws that needed to be undone. They needed a new tool to handle this. Whenever Frank had a chance to go outside, he would secretly drop the cement he had scraped from the grill. While working at the carpenter shop, Frank secretly made a small tool, but to get it out of the shop, he had to avoid the metal detector. He grabbed a rusty piece of metal, and when the metal detector alarm went off, he handed the guard the rusty piece while keeping his real tool hidden in his shoes. Once he was back in his cell, he used the new tool to open the grill, revealing a network of pipes that might just be their way out. But Frank knew they needed even more planning, so he decided to make a fake head that could trick the guards. He immediately started gathering materials, including hair from John's job at the barbershop. Charlie was responsible for arranging the paint, while Frank, with English's help, gathered a lot of newspapers. Once they had all the materials, Frank immediately got to work. First, he mixed the newspaper with the cement from the wall to create the frame for a human skull. Then he painted it and added hair, so they could use it to trick the guards. To strengthen their plan, Charlie made fake grills that looked like the real ones. These would be placed in place of the real grills when they were escaping, so the guards wouldn't notice they were missing. One night, Frank decided to go up alone. He used the fake skull and fake grills for this, but after reaching the top of the pipeline, he found a metal door that he couldn't access by himself. At that moment, a guard was making his rounds, and when he reached Frank's cell, he got suspicious. Despite this, they managed to avoid being caught, but they realized their plan needed to be adjusted. The next morning, Frank and Charlie discussed the incident from the previous night. By then, John and Clarence had also made their own fake skulls. After that, everyone decided to continue with the plan. That night, John and Charlie went back to the metal door. With each other's help, they reached the door and realized they could cut through it, but they needed more advanced tools to do so. The next day, during music class, Charlie noticed an old fan and immediately thought they could use it as a tool. He then traded all of his share of sweets for it with litmus. To take the fan outside, Charlie placed it in an instrument box, which helped them easily get it out. As soon as the fan was in Frank's hands, he immediately started turning it into a tool. They then went back to the metal door and used their new tool to cut through it. There was some noise, and the guards did hear it. But they, without thinking too much, they decided to ignore it. Meanwhile, Frank and his companions had paved their way, and they decided to escape from the world's most secure prison, Alcatraz, on Tuesday night. But on Tuesday morning, during breakfast, Frank placed a flower on the table in memory of Dog, which immediately caught the warden's attention. He reminded Frank of the prison's rules and crushed the flower. Litmus was the most furious about the warden's behavior, and as he moved toward attacking him, he suddenly collapsed due to a heart attack. After a while, the warden searched Frank's cell, but he found nothing, which made him even angrier. In his frustration, he ordered a cell transfer for Charlie and Frank. Meanwhile, Wolf had been freed from solitary confinement and was now fully prepared to attack Frank again. But just as he moved forward, English intervened and stopped him. That night, Frank, John, Charlie, and Clarence decided to meet in the pipes. However, at the last moment, Charlie got too scared and decided not to join the plan. The other three, however, continued moving forward exactly as planned, and Charlie could only watch as his dream of freedom slipped away. On the other side, as Frank and the others made their way through the pipe, they reached the roof, where they had to avoid searchlights. Charlie, too, eventually decided to escape, and he quickly rushed through the pipeline to the metal door. But now alone, he couldn't get through the door, meaning he lost his chance at freedom due to his fear. Meanwhile, Frank, John, and Clarence, while avoiding the searchlights, reached the prison wall. They checked to ensure no one was nearby, then quietly crossed the wall and escaped the prison. The three prisoners then crossed a road and reached the shore. They knew exactly what to do, and all three worked with calmness and speed. They quickly started inflating the boat, which was very difficult to do by mouth, but they managed to do it to save their lives. Now they ventured into the sea, away from the Alcatraz prison for good. The next morning, when the guards came for their rounds, everything seemed normal at first. But when they removed the sheets from Frank's bed, they were shocked. They had never imagined something like this happening. News spread quickly across the prison that some prisoners had escaped. Frank had replaced his head with a fake skull, and the guards immediately sounded the alarm. Soon it was discovered that two more prisoners had also escaped. A search operation began, using boats and helicopters, but no trace of Frank, John, or Clarence could be found. Some police officers speculated that the three had drowned in the sea, but deep down, the warden knew they had escaped. Someone had successfully broken out of what was considered the world's most secure prison. However, the warden had to preserve the prison's reputation, so he declared the three men dead to the public. But the truth was, no one believed him. This is a true story, and after it, Frank became famous worldwide as the genius who broke out of prison. For a year, secret search operations continued, but no bodies were ever found, which meant that they had successfully escaped. If you enjoyed this twisted ride, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And make sure to check out our other videos for more dark, thrilling stories. There's always something new waiting for you here on Egyptian Cinema Recaps. Catch you in the next one.